Princess Alice Battenberg's start in life couldn't have been more royal. Born at Windsor Castle in 1885, she was a great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Although her parents were more German than British, Alice was raised as an English princess. But from childhood, she was set apart from the rest of her family by a profound disability.
She was stone deaf, and my grandmother realized that she had to just get used to coping with her disability herself. She said to the family, look, if Alice doesn't hear and doesn't understand what you said, it's quite important not to repeat it so that she learns to stand on her own feet.
Her mother's tough love worked. By the age of 18, Alice could not only speak clearly, but also lip read in 3 languages. And
That's
in
incredible.
1902, at the coronation celebrations of King Edward VII,
Wow.
she met and fell in love with the glamorous Prince Andrew.
1902. I love
She
history.
was dotty about him, absolutely mad for him.
And if you're
Really,
watching
really
this,
deep
I'm
love.
assuming that you love
He was
history
very
as well.
entertaining and very charming.
And
And
particularly,
she
I love the
fell
history of the
rising.
royals because they're a nefarious bunch. Dun, dun, dun,
After their
dun,
wedding
dun,
in
dun.
1903,
What do they do all
Alice
day
set up
there?
living with her husband in her newly adopted country.
That's right, he was from Greece. Or Greek. Wasn't he?
At the royal family's palace in Athens,
Ah.
Alice settled into her allotted role as a princess.
They
and
must
mother.
have known the Onassuses.
In 10 years, she produced 4 daughters, and even managed to win over an increasingly anti-monarchist Greek public.
Huh.
Η πρίγκιψα Λίκη ήταν η πιο δημοφιλής από τις νύφες του Γεωργίου του Πρώτου. Και πρέπει να πω ότι η απλότητά της, το γεγονός ότι ήταν ξανθή και γαλανή, αυτό άρεσε πολύ στους Έλληνες. Η αμεσότητα που είχε με τον κόσμο.
The Greek idyll didn't last. In marrying Prince Andrew, Alice had hitched herself to the most unstable royal family in Europe. In 1912, a brutal war broke out between the Greeks and their bitter rivals, the Turks. Determined to make herself useful, Alice left her children and headed straight for the front, organizing a series of desperately needed battlefield hospitals.
She got really stuck in. She was there in the front for months on end, often working through the night in very, very primitive conditions, dealing with people who were being shot up all around her, losing limbs, and she was there literally wrapping the bandages.
Could you
She
imagine?
was hands-on.
I can't even fathom.
God, what things we saw. Shattered arms, legs and heads. Such awful sights. Cast off bandages
1913.
knee-high. The corridor full of blood.
This was just the start of 10 traumatic years for Alice and her family. The First World War triggered a decade of conflict in Greece between pro- and anti-royalist forces. In 1922, Republican troops entered Athens. Alice's brother-in-law, the king, fled the country. But her husband, Prince Andrew, was arrested and put on trial by a revolutionary court.
It was also awful. My aunt did have a very difficult time because, of course, there was a definite threat that my uncle Andrea might have ended up being executed for not being on the right side. So they must have come under a great deal of pressure.
To add to her worries, Alice had just given birth to a 5th child. In June 1921, Prince Philip was delivered on the kitchen table of Alice's country home. Philip was born 6th in line to the increasingly beleaguered Greek throne, but the child was blissfully oblivious to the crisis engulfing his family.
Philip sits with bare legs on the hard road and crawls on it without minding the stones. He laughs all day long. I have never seen such a cheerful baby.
But there was no time for celebrations. In December 1922, Philip's father, Prince Andrew, was convicted of disloyalty by the revolutionary authorities and faced a death sentence. When Prince Andrew was granted a last-minute stay of execution, the family seized their opportunity to flee. With the baby Prince Philip stowed in an orange crate as a makeshift cot, Alice and her family boarded a British warship and sailed into a humiliating exile.
I mean, they were lucky to make the
Alice's life as a conventional royal princess.
I mean, sailing in the seas back then, people would die. History to me is fascinating.
In 1923,
And again, if you're watching this, then you love history. And this is not a copyright infringement. It's all on YouTube.
In their flight from Greece, Alice and her husband had not only lost their fortune, but also much of their lives.
And without purpose. See, even royals have trouble with purpose.
He said to me, my recollection of the 1920s in Paris was that we were a very happy family and it was a very good time.
Huh.
And indeed, if you talk to witnesses, they'll talk about their bucket and spade holidays at the seaside. They will talk about the father, Prince Andrew, being there and being very charming, very amusing. But there was strain.
So the names are carried on throughout history.
We discovered during the making of this film and seen here for the first time.
So where did Archie come from?
A unique glimpse into Prince Philip's family.
I don't understand that at all. Archie?
In the 1920s.
I like Eugenie and Beatrice, Diana. Archie is like Archie Bunker was a racist, a bigot. So why did they choose the name Archie? I mean,
the pressures of exile were beginning to tell.
I'm talking about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's
και ζουν ουσιαστικά με τη βοήθεια πλούσιων συγγενών. Για έναν άνθρωπο
But that's a whole other subject.
Αλλά από εκεί και πέρα έχει την αίσθηση ότι ένα κομμάτι του εαυτού του έχει μείνει πίσω στην Ελλάδα και έχει πεθάνει.
While Prince Andrew brooded on his fate, Philip's mother was left isolated and emotionally vulnerable.
For her, it was very, very frustrating when big family groups, which often happened, we would be 20 around the table. And then, of course, she was lost, you know, she couldn't see people's lips. And suddenly, somebody would start roaring with laughter at the end of the table. And she'd think it was a joke about her.
Aww.
Which, of course, it never was.
Trapped in her silent world, dark thoughts began to prey on Alice's mind. In 1928, aged 43, she announced a sudden conversion to the Greek Orthodox Church. But increasingly, her religious beliefs were anything but orthodox.
Princess Alice seems to have become increasingly religious, very, very preoccupied with the spiritual. She began to tell people that she had a very intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. She used sexual language and spoke about flirtations with Jesus Christ and so forth. She ultimately came to believe that she had a photograph signed by Jesus Christ. And what we see in Princess Alice is what sometimes can be called religious delusions, not ordinary religiosity.
That could have been part of Annalise Michael's story as well. And as soon as I can find the book after I finish, well, it's packed. So I can start reading The Exorcism of Annalise Michael again on Thursday, the 16th of November.
In desperation, Alice's family turned to the fashionable new science of psychiatry.
The Sanatorium Schloss Tegel, the first cyclitic intramural sanatorium founded and erected by Ernst Simmel, who has contributed enormously to the literature.
Now, sanitariums back then, and when we talk about Frances Farmer, and when I read her book, Will There Really Be a Morning? She was an actress in the 30s, and her mother had her committed to egregious violations.
Which was built as a special cyclitic hospital.
Mental health has come such a long way. Human beings, in my opinion, used to be barbaric.
So severely mentally ill that they could not visit the doctors and in their offices or in the institutes.
Why?
There were phobias, obsessive compulsive neurosis, and also addictions of different kinds, alcohol, cocaine, and so on.
Really?
And therefore Simmel tried to treat patients.
Cocaine in the 30s? Really?
Not successfully be treated.
Well, maybe that's where Harry got it from. It must be genetic.
Alice of Greece.
That's not a joke. If there were addictions, it runs in the family and they're all inbred. Why does nobody... Why is it that when I post a video, first of all, I'm not going to post anything anymore if there's no comments, because there's no point of doing it.
12, 13, something like that. I wasn't inside the building very often. It was really parts of it where
I'll finish my thoughts another day.
For obvious reasons. I spent most of my time in the park, really. But I certainly saw people having epileptic fits. I certainly saw people who shouted and cursed and spat. Pretty, crazy people.
Ugh.
I remember they used to roll on the grass and say, I'm getting better, I'm getting better. Every day I'm getting better. I'm better today than yesterday.
Because they want it out of there.
I'll be better tomorrow. Well, I was not convinced.
Well, you know what? If I was stuck in there, I'd be spitting and shouting and screaming as well.
From the table reveal that Simmel diagnosed Princess Alice with paranoid schizophrenia.
No.
She began to hear voices and believed herself to be not only married but also physically involved with Christ and with other religious figures, including Buddha.
Buddha.
In his search for the origins of Alice's illness, Simmel discovered an important clue.
One of Princess Alice's ladies-in-waiting had told him, privately off the record, that the Princess Alice had a very, very deep passion for an Englishman back in the mid-1920s.
Just like Meghan Markle.
Consummated.
Meghan Markle's real name is Rachel. Rachel Meghan Markle. They should have called her Meghan Rachel Markle.
Repressed or dammed up or complicated
RMM.
Alice would never disclose the identity of her mystery love, but Dr. Simmel believed the princess's frustrated desires were an important factor in her breakdown.
Princess Alice, we must remember, was born to the royal family in 1885.
Wow.
At a time when women's bodies were encased in corsets, and women were not really encouraged to have a sexuality beyond a procreative marriage.
You know, I can't stand listening to men talk about what women could or couldn't do back then. I wish there was a woman speaking about this instead of him. Nothing against this fella, because he's where he is and I'm just sitting here passing on the information.
Towards someone other than her husband and not quite know what to do with these feelings.
You think?
Seeking advice for how to treat his royal patient, Dr. Simmel now turned to a famous colleague and mentor.
Freud?
The visitor's book for the Tegel Clinic reveals that in 1930, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis himself, visited the Tegel and personally reviewed Princess Alice's case.
And we will be back tomorrow with the continuation.